Unearthed testimony alleging the FBI had an informant inside the highest levels of Al-Qaeda before 9/11. This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Brett Baer. We have new information tonight on just how far ahead of the September 11th, 2001 terror attacks the U.S. government had any idea of how dangerous Osama bin Laden could be. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is here with fascinating details. Good evening, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Brett. According to court documents, the FBI source was in direct contact with Osama bin Laden 8 years before the 9/11 attacks. It was clear even then that the Al-Qaeda leader wanted to finance plots inside the U.S., and it appears none of this information was shared with the 9/11 Commission nor the relevant congressional committees. The human intelligence asset was run by this FBI agent, Bassam Youssef. The connection to bin Laden only came to light after Youssef filed a discrimination suit against the Bureau, and his supervisor, Edward Curran, testified about the quality of his work and the assets he was running. Quote, "It was the only source I know in the Bureau where we had a source right in Al-Qaeda directly involved. It's a very small group, but this person was already there." The asset was also connected to the blind sheikh who's serving a life prison sentence for charges that followed the first World Trade Center attack in 1993. The asset's information helped the FBI disrupt a terrorism plot against a Los Angeles Masonic lodge in the 90s. According to the Washington Times, which first reported the disclosure, neither Lee Hamilton, who chaired the 9/11 Commission, nor Philip Zelikow, its executive director, could remember being told about the FBI asset. A former head of the House Intelligence Committee said they were in the dark, too.
This is the first time that anybody really did a deep dive into Al-Qaeda. What were their capabilities? What were their plans? And why did we walk away from bin Laden or his organization sometime in the 90s when we were that close?
In a statement, an FBI spokesman said all relevant information was provided to the 9/11 Commission, but separately a senior law enforcement official tried to cast doubt on the accuracy of Curran's testimony and the source's access to bin Laden. Brett.
Okay, Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
The clock is ticking on U.S. troop presence in what is already the site of America's longest war. But is President Obama in such a rush to get out of Afghanistan that he's risking a return of the Taliban? National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin takes a look from the Pentagon tonight.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Martin Dempsey, flew to Kabul and spent the day with U.S. commanders and troops, explaining the president's latest directive to start planning for the withdrawal of all U.S. forces by the end of the year. General Dempsey warned that Afghan President Hamid Karzai's unwillingness to sign a bilateral security agreement and uncertainty about a future U.S. presence encourages Afghan security forces to hedge their bets and begin siding with the Taliban. He added, quote, "It is having an effect on the enemy, and in some ways I think encourages them, and intelligence supports that." Karzai's spokesman denied President Obama issued any ultimatums when he talked by phone with the Afghan president Tuesday.
There was no such discussion of a complete withdrawal in the conversation as suggested in the media.
Karzai says he won't sign the security agreement until after Afghanistan's presidential elections in April.
The longer we wait, the more likely the possibility is that we end up with a zero option, with no troops at all beyond 2014.
Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel is in Brussels for a two-day meeting with NATO defense chiefs. His goal, to ensure that the other allies don't begin a run for the exits in Afghanistan. NATO's Secretary General issued his own warning.
If there is no agreement, there will be no NATO troops in Afghanistan after 2014.
Yesterday's phone call was the first time that President Obama had spoken to Karzai since last June.
It's unprecedented in wartime for a wartime president not to engage in constant discourse with his principal ally.
The chairman of the House Armed Services Committee gave a scathing speech this week condemning President Obama for remaining disengaged from Afghanistan.
It's incredible that the president has only talked about this war a handful of times. And people don't know what's going on, don't know what we've accomplished, don't know the successes that our troops have had, and I just think that that is reprehensible.
Both Scales and McKeon suggest the president's silence on Afghanistan demonstrates he would actually prefer to leave at the end of the year, despite what his commanders want. General Dempsey, a proponent of staying, left Afghanistan today without meeting Karzai. Brett.
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. More on this with the panel. In Nigeria, hospital officials say a 16-year-old boy has died of gunshot wounds following Tuesday's Islamic extremist attack on a school, raising the death toll there to 59. 10 students are still in the hospital. The attack was carried out by a militant group whose name means Western education is forbidden. Syrian state media reports government troops killed 175 rebels today in an ambush south of Damascus. If confirmed, it would be one of the deadliest attacks in the 3-year-old civil war. The state news agency says most of the dead belong to the Al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front rebel group. Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered massive military exercises along his border with Ukraine. The Russian defense minister says troops will check their readiness for action in crisis situations. Russian officials deny any plans to move militarily on Ukraine. And U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is downplaying any East-West tensions, quipping to NBC, quote, "This is not Rocky IV." Democrats are preparing to launch a new wave of political attacks on Republicans, alleging a so-called war on women. But in the second part of his story on how Obamacare could devastate home health care, Chief National Correspondent Jim Engel reports Democrats are vulnerable because the administration's moves will disproportionately hurt women.
The administration's cuts to home health care providers, mostly women, was mystifying to politicians of both parties, as well as caregivers like Dr. David Fisher, who makes house calls to treat seniors in their homes, fulfilling one of the promises of Obamacare.
The home health services people are receiving is actually bending the cost curve down. And I think if we focus more on that aspect of our health care system, we'll bend that cost curve even further.
Then why